Rocket Launch Pad. And now, here's Johnny.
Hey, it's Heather Nixon, voice of reason here on the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, launching ideas in your direction. Welcome back, and we are here with our co-host, Curt Nelson.
Boudreaux.
And the big man, host man, Johnny Rocket Adams.
Hi.
Yeah.
All right, so it's kind of weird because usually we go over Rocket Fire in the last segment, but we did that. We only had our guest for a short time, but we do thank him for fitting us in.
Okay, he's a badass.
Professor Boudreaux! It's a slow clap. Come on, guys.
It's golf clap.
So we're mixing things up because, yeah, we're just filling time. It's just three of us staring at each other.
Right.
Hear the crickets.
Right.
Put in crickets
Chirp.
right there.
Chirp.
That'd be good. So the other night, we watched an awesome movie, Selma.
Selma.
And it's about the civil rights movement back in 1965. Martin Luther King was a major part of that story.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you think of that movie, Johnny?
I thought it was good. It was touching. It was heartfelt. I thought it showed a lot of the inhumane actions, how the South had treated the black people of the community, even though they were freed. It showed the trials that they had to go through.
Sure. Well, but yeah, freeing them was only the first step.
Right. And, and they wanted to have the right to vote. That was the main focus of the movie, I believe. And it showed that Lyndon Johnson wasn't very proactive in being a president in regards to the voting of African Americans, and he wasn't really willing to enforce those things. He was hesitant depicted in the movie, but it showed the ugliness of racism.
Blacks had the right to vote, but what was going on in certain states and certain counties and jurisdictions, they were putting up rules that were basically making it impossible for African Americans to register to vote. They either weren't allowed in the building, I mean, as blatant as that, or they were made to, there were requirements that no normal person would ever be able to pass at all.
Right.
Especially due to the situation. Some people were illiterate, so that, they couldn't fill out the form. And if you couldn't fill out the form, you were disqualified.
Right.
One of the scenes in the movie, Oprah Winfrey was in it, and she filled out the form, and they made it quite clear that this was, she had been there several times trying to register to vote, which was her right, and she was determined to do it. And he asked her how many judges were in the
Alabama,
county,
right.
in the county, and she said 57. And he was all shocked that she knew that, and he said, "Name them."
Right.
And she couldn't, so he denied.
And so it really brought home a lot of the behavior of the southern states.
Sure.
However, going into this whole thing, we've had Kevin Gutzman on our show.
Right.
And we've talked about federalism versus nationalism and what the constraints of the government are in a federal system. See, under the federal system, the government had no right to actually intervene.
And that was touched on in the film where Johnson, because Martin Luther King would go, he went to the White House. He was very involved in trying to correct this wrong. And Johnson's basically say, hey, this is a state issue. And George Wallace,
who was the governor of Alabama at the time,
he didn't want the blacks to be able to vote because then they had a voice, they had power, and the crony racist good old boys were going to lose their jobs.
Right.
So Johnson was just like, this is a state issue. This has nothing to do with me. And he just wanted it all to go away.
All right. Well, yeah. And so basically, in certain ways, we kind of get into this whole thing with Barry Goldwater. And Barry Goldwater was a conservative, but he was also a libertarian who was very active in the African American rights movement. However, he voted against the Civil Rights Act because he thought that it was unconstitutional. What had happened was the unintended consequence was that people had lost their rights to operate their businesses in the nature that they wanted to. So property rights pretty much went out the window with the Civil Rights Act. The right to vote, I think, is a different issue altogether. what ended up happening was, and we see it today, where we had established quotas, where this business had to hire X amount of Asians, X amount of Mexicans, X amount of blacks, and X amount of whites to make it fair.
Sure.
This is a touchy subject, but I'm going to bring it out. I don't think that was right. I don't think quotas are right.
Yeah.
So we can look at this in two different ways. Is it a federal issue or is it a state issue? And I think it was a state issue. And I guess what I'm urging you listeners to think about is, if you're a libertarian, even if you're not a libertarian, how could this problem be solved by the free market? What could businesses do? What could individuals do to fight this situation, to fight this ugliness of racism? And one of the greatest guys I ever heard is Walter E. Williams and Thomas Sowell. They both talk about these, both black guys, and they both made a very wonderful statement. And they said there's a difference between racism and discrimination. You can't measure racism in someone's mind, but discrimination can be measured. And it's a great point they bring up. Is it in a business's best interest to serve everyone because the dollar votes?
Right.
So that is my philosophy on that. There's things that people could have done around the country to have stifled them without giving up our rights and liberties, just because a bunch of good old boy redneck racists existed in this society, in this state. And having a blanket government, federal government law or legislation was wrong. And the Jim Crow laws were created by the government themselves.
I tend to agree with you, but for the sake of devil's advocate, what are some of these things that could be done?
Regarding what?
You're saying using the free market.
People won't buy goods from Alabama. People will starve their economic prosperity, put political pressure on those individuals.
But the situation back then
Sure.
was so different that I don't think you would have seen that so much.
I think you would have. I think you would have. I think if there was enough people. Because in the
there
movie.
wouldn't be, though, because at that point, the black dollar was non-existent.
What happened in Alabama, in Selma, there was a march, and there were 3 different attempts to march into the Capitol. And the first time that the march was attempted, the state patrol, right, it was the troopers, basically beat the people down, men, women, children, with clubs. There were people who lived in the community shouting horrible things at them.
Spitting on them.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, they were literally beaten bloody.
Mm-hmm.
They then, Martin Luther King came and marched with them. And there was an order for the state troopers to stand down and let them march to the Capitol. But Martin Luther King turned back. And then what happened is, because the beating, the atrocities were on film and reported on national TV, there was national outcry, and people came from all over the country, mostly clergymen, to Selma to march with them, to give them a voice, and to make people pay attention, which, is that right? That you needed a bunch
I think
of
that's great. It's public opinion.
Right.
And that holds a lot of weight.
Yeah, and then
It's like a bad Yelp review.
a priest from Boston was actually beaten to death after the march, a white priest. And then finally they did their final march. And what the Civil Rights Act did was it made it so you cannot discriminate against somebody based on color. It's all encompassing. But instead of just focusing on federal, it also, what I think what Johnny's talking about is the things that affect private businesses, not just government. So should the national government gotten involved at all is Johnny's question. I happen to believe, and I'll wrap this up quick, that because things weren't changing and the powers that be in that state were not doing what they needed to do and upholding the laws and allowing those individual cities and counties to violate those people's rights, that they had to step in. But do I think it was overreaching? Maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it was to a point that it was fucking disgusting.
Yes.
It was.
It was disgusting. The way humans were acting against other humans, and nothing was being done about it. And I think maybe it was left for long enough for the states to do something about it. The states didn't do anything about it. And
Right.
so maybe it's not the way it even actually went, but the federal government stepped in and did something, and I believe out of necessity.
Absolutely, because you had a lot of the younger people were going down to help the blacks register to vote, and there were several of these activists, black and white, that just disappeared out in the middle of nowhere in these southern states.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
This was in those communities. There was going to be no action. There was going to be no consequences.
There was going to be a lot of stagnation. I'm not denying that. Mm-hmm. Okay. But what I am getting at is racism is very ugly. I think that through education, through technology, that we are understanding cultures that we do have. We understand those cultures. I think technology has brought us closer together in a lot of ways.
Sure it has.
Okay. But what I'm getting at is that I believe that it was an overreach in federal power. And I believe that the state should have handled it, but we as citizens could have done things to make those certain states' lives miserable through free market. We could have stopped travel there. We could have done a lot of things to actually deplete their economy.
Well, through banning travel would be just as overreaching. But
well, no. I'm just saying, like, you as an individual, they wouldn't stop the flights to that state. I almost said country. They wouldn't stop those flights to that state. But if nobody was there to buy things in that state, it's not an immediate result, but again, it set the standard for the rest of the states. I think, yes, they have the right to liberty. Every individual has the right to liberty. Mm-hmm. They have a natural right. And I think what they could have done, there will be arguments against my point of view, that people could just get up and fucking leave. Fuck you, Alabama. You're a bunch of fucking racist rednecks. Fuck you. I'm going to move to goddamn Illinois because I could have an opportunity there.
Wait, when you talk about the black people who lived in these states at the time, a lot of them were incredibly impoverished. They were struggling on a daily basis just to get by. I mean, just picking up and moving was not an option.
Talking about people who didn't have shoes to walk down the street.
Right. And so, or if they did have property, they did have homes, why should they have to walk away from them? And so because I think that the federal government had to get involved, because the powers that be in the state were allowing it to happen. It was encouraged to happen. A lot of those communities embraced that culture of racism. Mm-hmm. And so, and it was, just the dawning of television and national news. And when the word was getting out, people were outraged. But then again, most people have to do what they have to do and go to work every day. They can't go down and change those kind of things. So I think that, and especially Johnson sent down the National Guard to protect the marchers when they did march into the Capitol. So it needed to be done.
It is.
And like I said, I do think that maybe certain things were overreaching that affected private businesses.
Absolutely.
When you're talking about the unintended consequences. But I think it was to a situation when people are getting murdered, their homes are getting burned down.
But again, I don't know. I mean, I just think that you bring valid points to and I don't want to see anyone die or get injured or hurt or anything along those lines. I just think that we need to look at things. Was it overreaching? I think it was. I think it was overreaching of the federal government to get involved. And it could have been solved through economic free market alternatives.
Yeah, I disagree. But I feel you. I just don't think those states were fine with the way things were going. They were fine beating black people up. They were fine committing the atrocities.
Right.
And the majority of the people thought that was a good thing. So the state wasn't going to step in and do anything about it.
Right. But what I'm getting at is free market from the other things. Trade. Businesses who had sympathy towards the situation.
Where, though? Not in those states.
Oh, yeah. That's where they got the majority of those people who went out and marched. They went out there and they marched in the name of these people who are being discriminated against.
Right. But that's not the majority. That wasn't the majority.
It was a lot of people who were for this, who thought it was unfair.
They were from, I think...
They were from the northern states.
Right. But then they were going home. And just to drive home the point that nothing was going to change unless somebody stepped in to change it, Alabama reelected George Wallace. Obviously, the people...
I lived in Alabama.
Not back then, you didn't
know. No, but it was, you know what? I mean, it's not uncommon.
To see racism?
No, I didn't really see it.
Really?
No, I didn't. Okay. But what I did see was there was a lot of Confederate flags.
Okay.
All right. But I also saw black people with Confederate flags.
Okay.
And I thought that was kind of ironic. I have never really personally seen blatant racism in the South when I lived there. I didn't see anyone ever say the N-word or any of these things. I've never witnessed that. I don't know. You can't measure that, though.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you live. I mean, you lived...
I was on an army base.
Yeah, you were on an army base, which is a multicultural...
environment. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you're going to, more, integrated places where people come from all over the country or all over the world. If you went more into the rural, isolated places.
Come on here. Like that.
Yeah, those places.
All right.
Yeah.
Enter banjo music from Deliverance right now.
Right.
Yeah. And there are also people who have opinions that they know are not accepted into society, but they are accepted in their family or their community, and so they wouldn't necessarily say those things in front of a quote-unquote outsider.
Right. No, I'm not saying what happened was right. I'm saying it was really wrong. It was immoral. It was immoral on every degree imaginable. I'm saying that there was a limit of what the federal government could have done, and it was an overreach, and I thought it was an overreach.
I think it was necessary for the education, personally.
But I think right now, technology, the market itself.
Oh, now it's way different, though.
It's way different now.
And people are more educated, and you couldn't argue with the fact that was the beginning of that education.
Right, absolutely. And I think this is what has occurred. I think we have become more and more educated and understanding of culture
and diverse
Mm-hmm. and we judge people on the basis of their behavior, not of their nationality or religion or their skin color. And I think this is a cool thing with regards to.
Of course, it is. Yeah.
And Heather brought up a point, and she said we're a global economy. Okay.
Yep.
And being a global economy, we work with people of different nationalities and other things. I mean. And I find it funny, though, that the Irish and the Jews...
Start talking about my people, man.
Yeah, but I'm fucking Irish, too. A lot of those people they had the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
They did. They had the same problems. Don't even get me started on Germany with the Jews.
Come on.
All right. But those are things that have occurred through history.
Yeah. Well, there are things that still go on now. I mean, quite recently, you have... Serbia and Croatia. They're, they're...
That's where Liberland is.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we don't want to go there. The atrocities that they committed...
I want to go there. I like saying the name, Liberland.
The atrocities that were, very recent, there are things that go on in parts of Africa where people are slaughtered. In Iraq, they gas the Kurds. We're talking about mass genocide, and I think that when those sort of things happen, someone needs to step in to protect the helpless.
I think so, too. I mean, when it gets to a ridiculous point.
When people, maybe, when people are getting murdered. I think it's up for the states.
Or just, I'm not
Let
ridiculously
me take a step back here. Let me take a step back here. The violence, the federal government could have stepped in for the violence in that state because that is constitutional. But to create a law, let me make myself clear, is that if the state government was inflicting violence on innocent people, that is the job of the federal government to step in. What is not the job of the government to step in is to create blanket laws that prohibit private businesses from succeeding.
I agree.
Okay, do you understand where I'm getting at?
Absolutely. However, I think in that particular instance, it was necessary.
For blanket statements.
I do.
Okay. I disagree, but that's cool.
Yeah, well, totally. Totally.
Okay. But this is launching ideas, and this is what the show's about.
In each other's directions.
Each other's directions.
You're launching ideas right in my face, bro.
And then you're launching them back.
Ew, it's in my
but
eye.
I see.
Ow. It got in my eye.
But here's the thing, though, man. You bring a great point, though, and I understand your argument. I do.
And not yours, really.
I really do. I feel like I understand why you feel that way. And I think that's like, I understand why anarchists are anarchists. And I understand why people are this way or people are that way. I understand that.
Well, and that's part of honestly, the libertarian ideal. Like, don't tread on me, man.
Right. And I do want to make clear that the Civil Rights Act, what it says is if an organization is receiving federal money, they cannot discriminate based on ethnicity, race, sex.
That's right. I agree with that.
That
statement.
is very specific if you're receiving federal money.
But we can go back to that whole public accommodation laws and the Commerce Clause. that you got that food from a farmer in Nebraska, but you live in Texas.
That's not what we're talking about, though.
No, but this is where it all comes together. This is the point.
You connecting some dots here right now?
I'm connecting dots.
Okay.
Where this is what I'm saying, where it's kind of an overreach of what the federal government can do. You know, as we discuss these things like the Bill of Rights were not to the individual. They were for, according to Kevin Gutzman, they were for the states, what they couldn't do to the states. Now, if the states wanted to be a bunch of dickheads, the states could do that. Just like 591 in Washington state.
Sure.
591
is the state being dickheads,
right? But the federal government can come in and try to police that up. But our argument is it's
unconstitutional.
It's our Washington state constitution. That's the argument. That's the real argument.
But would you agree that you know, the foundation, that if, you know, especially when you're talking about a government public agency, if they're receiving federal money, which
absolutely
with all city, county, state agencies do receive some federal money, you cannot discriminate.
Absolutely. It's federal.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
There's no question there.
So they needed they created that law, and so there we go. We have it. It's constitutional.
And we've reached a decision.
Yay! I agree with that, though. If you have federal money, you cannot discriminate. Absolutely, 100%. In that particular, I'm talking about individual private businesses. That's what I was getting at. You can't apply that to that situation because that's property rights. Even though it can be morally wrong.
So why couldn't you let us have our little moment?
Yay, let's do it again.
Yay! We're going back.
Retrograde. All right, Heather, close us out.
No, you got to have the last word. You're going to have
You
it.
do.
No,
Come
you
on,
go
man.
ahead. You're
Johnny,
going to do it
this is yours.
anyway. You're going to do it anyway. Go ahead.
It's all right, Heather. I'll edit his wrap up from last week in here. Just drop it in.
Hey, it's Johnny Rocket here at the Johnny Rocket Launchpad, launching ideas in your direction, the Northwest's only rock and roll libertarian radio show. Thank you guys very much for sticking around with us. And next week we have, we have a special guest.
Some other badass dude.
Yeah, we're gonna have another badass motherfucker.
Or maybe it might even be a badass chick, but it's probably a dude.
No, it's a dude. It's a dude.
Probably a dude.
Anyways, it's Johnny Rocket launching ideas, and make sure you check out the Haunted Heel.
Yes, they're badass.
You get 10% off their order.
I was looking at their website. Even their website's badass.
And it's pretty cool, man. Retro Rock one-stop shop.
That's right. You need to support. They are mom and pop business. Lisa and Dave are awesome. So, support them.
Yeah, check them out. HauntedHeel.com. Type in Johnny Rocket. You get 10% off your order of all your vintage clothing from TUK, Sailor Jerry, and Lucky 13. See you next week.